All Marvel human beings are a little bit more super than humans in the real world. In Marvel's universe, humans aren't exactly the same as humans in our world. Millions of years ago, the Celestials tampered with early human DNA, planting the potential for superhuman evolution inside the species. Because of this, Earth in Marvel isn't just a regular planet, it's a long-term celestial experiment. Every single human has a slightly altered, enhanced genetic potential built into them from the beginning, even if most people never activate it. This is one of the biggest reasons powers in Marvel can happen so easily. A random lab accident, a gamma explosion, cosmic radiation, or even magical exposure can turn a normal person into a superhuman instead of instantly killing them like it would in real life. The science of Marvel is wild, because the biology of Marvel is also wild. Humans there are literally engineered to unlock powers when triggered by extreme events. This celestial interference is also why mutants exist. That same genetic modification created the foundation for mutant genes. Over generations, it eventually evolved into the X gene, giving birth to a new class of superpowered humans like Cyclops, Magneto, Jean Grey, Storm, and Wolverine. Mutants aren't random freak accidents. They are the natural, evolutionary next step that the Celestials set in motion from the start. So when fans wonder why Earth 616 is always the center of reality-shaken cosmic events, the reason is simple. The Celestials designed it that way. Marvel humans were always meant for something bigger, and the potential for superpowers is literally built into their DNA by cosmic gods. Michael Jackson tried to buy Marvel to play Spider-Man. This one sounds like a random internet rumor, but it actually has some truth behind it. Michael Jackson was a huge comic book fan with a massive collection, and in the 1990s, when Marvel Comics was struggling financially, he seriously looked into buying the company at the time. Marvel wasn't the giant we know today, so the idea wasn't as impossible as it sounds now. According to Stan Lee, Jackson's motivation wasn't business, it was personal. He really wanted to play Spider-Man in a movie, and he believed that owning Marvel would give him the power to make that happen. He even explored working with Stan Lee through Stan Lee Media to try and put together a deal. Just imagine that timeline for a second. Michael Jackson as Spider-Man, backed by a Marvel he owns himself. That's a completely different universe. The deal never went through, of course, whether it was financial complications, timing, or just things not lining up. The idea fell apart before anything could happen. Marvel eventually recovered on its own, and years later, the character of Spider-Man would go to become one of the biggest movie franchises in the world, but without Jackson involved. Looking back, it's one of those insane what-if scenarios that could have changed everything, not just for Marvel, but for superhero movies in general. Because if that deal had actually happened, the entire direction of comic book films, and maybe even the MCU as we know it, could have been completely different. And we might have gotten Michael Jackson swinging through New York in a Spider-Man suit. Marvel has always been based in New York City. Instead of inventing fictional cities, Marvel leaned into real places. That's why characters like Spider-Man swing through Queens, Daredevil projects Hell's Kitchen, and the Avengers operate right out of Manhattan. The city is part of the identity of the entire universe, and this isn't just a storytelling choice, it comes from real life. Since its early days, Marvel has always had its headquarters in New York, moving between different offices, but never really leaving the city. Over the decades, they've been located on famous spots like Madison Avenue, Park Avenue, and even inside the Empire State Building. So when writers were creating stories, they were literally writing about the streets outside their windows. That connection gave Marvel a very different tone compared to other publishers. The heroes felt more real because they lived in the same world as the readers. You could walk down a street in New York and think, yeah, Spider-Man could swing past here. That level of realism made characters more relatable, especially when combined with their personal struggles and everyday problems. Even today, that DNA is still there. Marvel might be a global brand now, but New York is still at its core. It's where the company grew, where its biggest characters were shaped, and where so many of its stories still began. The ooze that gave the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles their powers is the same ooze that gave Matt Murdock his powers. The Ninja Turtles were originally created as a dark parody of Daredevil's world, and that's why their origins line up so strangely close. In the original Mirage comics, the ooze that mutated the Turtles is implied to be the exact same radioactive substance that blinded young Matt Murdock and gave him his powers. They never officially state it word for word, but it is directly written and framed to be the same incident, same canister, same spell. It's one of those hidden comic connections that fans didn't imagine. It was done intentionally by the creators from the start. The parallels continue with their mentors Wars, Daredevil was trained by Sick, a harsh, mysterious martial arts master who lives in the shadows and fights an ancient, hidden war. The Turtles were trained by Splinter, which is a direct parody reflection of Sick. Splinter exists because they were referencing and playing off Daredevil's mentor. It makes the two universes feel almost like mirror worlds, where one is slightly more serious and grounded, and the other is a wild, mutated version of it. Even their villains match up. Daredevil fights the hand, the Turtles fight the foot. It was subtle. The TMNT creators fully leaned into Daredevil's lore and remixed it into something weird, funny, and iconic on its own. And that's what made the Ooze connection such a loved piece of comic trivia, because it links two massive pop culture universes in a quiet, unofficial way. Sabretooth beats Wolverine every year. Sabretooth and Wolverine have one of the most brutal rivalries in all of Marvel Comics, and one of the darkest parts of that rivalry is a twisted tradition Sabretooth used to follow. In older stories, Sabretooth would track Wolverine down every year on his birthday, specifically just to beat him, humiliate him, and remind him that he was weaker. This wasn't just about winning a fight, it was psychological torture meant to break Logan on an emotional level. These yearly attacks became part of Wolverine's trauma. His birthday wasn't something he looked forward to, it was something he dreaded because he knew Sabretooth might suddenly appear and put him through hell again. Sabretooth didn't do this to kill him. He did it because hurting Logan mentally was more satisfying for him than ending his life. He enjoyed watching Wolverine fail, panic, and suffer. Even though modern Marvel stories have changed and evolved their dynamic, this tradition was a real part of their history and helped define why Logan hates and fears Sabretooth on a deeper level than most villains. It wasn't just one brutal fight. It was a repeated cycle that wore on Wolverine over many years. The Punisher pretends to be a young girl online to lure predators to meeting spots so he can abduct or kill them. The Punisher has done some extremely dark things in Marvel Comics, and one of the most disturbing is how he goes after certain criminals online. Frank Castle has been shown pretending to be a young girl on the internet, not for jokes or manipulation, but to bait and expose predators who try to target minors. He uses fake accounts, fake conversations, and fake identities to pull them in, playing along until they agree to meet in person. When these predators show up thinking they are going to meet a child, they instead run into Frank Castle himself, and Punisher doesn't arrest them or call the police. He deals with them his own way. Frank believes that certain types of criminals don't deserve second chances, so he handles them personally with little force. This is not a one-time joke or a one-off gag, it's something Frank has done more than once in different storylines, showing how far he is willing to go in order to punish people he considers the absolute worst of society. And it fits with his moral code. He does whatever it takes to eliminate threats permanently, even if the method is morally extreme. This also shows the sharp contrast between Punisher and most other Marvel heroes, Spider-Man, Daredevil, Cap. They would never cross that line. But Frank doesn't believe in rehabilitation, trials, or letting anyone slip through the legal system. In his mind, tricking predators online and hunting them down is justified because he thinks no punishment from the law would ever be enough for them. The Marvel Method. During the 1960s, Marvel Comics was growing so fast that even someone like Stan Lee couldn't keep up with writing full scripts for every single book. So instead of doing things the traditional way, he came up with something completely different, and that's the Marvel Method. Instead of handing artists a detailed, panel-by-panel script, he would just give them a rough plot outline, sometimes only a few sentences. From there, the artists had the freedom to figure out how the story actually played out visually. This completely changed the role of artists. People like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko were basically co-directing the story. They decided the pacing, the action, the layout, and even added storytelling elements that weren't in the original outline. That's a big reason why Marvel Comics from that era feel so dynamic and cinematic. The action flows better, the panels feel more alive, and everything has this natural energy that stood out compared to other comics at the time. Once the artwork was done, Stan Lee would come back in and add the dialogue and captions on top of it. That final step gave the comics their signature voice, the humor, the personality, the iconic lines, but the structure of the story was already shaped by the artist. It was a super efficient system that allowed Marvel to produce more content while still keeping that creative spark alive. But it also created a lot of controversy later on. Because artists were doing so much of the storytelling work, many people felt they deserved more credit, and with that, more money than they originally received. Yes, the Marvel Method helped build the company's success, but it also sparked long-running debates about creator rights and recognition that are still talked about today. Marvel copies DC. Marvel and DC have influenced each other for decades, and it's normal in comics that one company inspires, reacts to, or mirrors the other. Superheroes were not born in isolation, and both companies constantly respond to whatever is trending or selling well on the other side. So yes, Marvel has copied DC many times, just like DC has copied Marvel. It's part of the superhero arms race, where both companies fight to stay relevant, competitive, and fresh with ideas. For example, Marvel created Thanos after DC had Darkseid. The designers literally admitted he was inspired by Kirby's Cosmic Gods, and they went even more extreme with him. DC's Aquaman existed long before Marvel made Namor mainstream again. DC had Flash first, Marvel made Quicksilver later. DC had Shazam, Marvel created characters like Thor and Hercules that played in the same ancient power space. The industry constantly mirrors itself because audiences wanted similar archetypes but with different spins. It also happens with teams. Justice League existed first, then Marvel created the Avengers. Doom Patrol existed before the X-Men, and the creators have openly admitted Marvel likely saw the pattern and built their own twist on the outcast with strange powers concept. These aren't hidden secrets. These are well-known examples fans have talked about for decades, and comic historians treat them as normal part of superhero publication culture. Marvel changed the formula though. When Marvel copied something, they usually turned it into something darker, more flawed, more grounded, and more emotional. DC heroes were symbols and icons. Marvel heroes were people with trauma, chaos, identity struggles, science disasters, and broken personal lives. Marvel made their copies feel more real, which is why those characters ended up evolving beyond the initial inspiration and becoming iconic in their own right. Marvel created a superhero for a 4-year-old child. Marvel has always had a strong connection with its fans, but this story takes that to a whole different level. A 4-year-old boy named Anthony didn't want to wear his hearing aid because he never saw any superheroes who looked like him. So his mom reached out to Marvel Comics hoping for something, anything that could help, and instead of just sending a nice reply, Marvel actually decided to create something just for him. That's how a brand new hero was born, Blue Ear, inspired by Anthony's blue hearing aid. Marvel artists and writers designed a superhero who proudly wore one too. They even tied it into existing lore by referencing Hawkeye, who in some comics had hearing loss and used hearing aids as well. Suddenly Anthony wasn't alone anymore. He had a superhero who looked like him, and even better, he was told that if he wore his hearing aid, he could be an honorary Avenger. But Marvel didn't stop there. They partnered with organizations like the Children's Hearing Institute to turn this into something bigger, spreading awareness about hearing health for kids. And Blue Ear even appeared alongside Iron Man in a special comic. It's honestly one of the most wholesome things Marvel has ever done. Out of all the crazy powers and epic battles, sometimes the most impactful stories are the smallest ones. They helped a kid feel seen, understood, and proud of who he is. And that's kind of what superheroes are supposed to do in the first place. When Taskmaster copies something, he has to forget something else, like events, places, and people. Taskmaster has photographic reflexes, which means the moment he sees someone fight, move, or perform a skill, he can instantly learn it and replicate it almost perfectly. That's why he can fight like Daredevil, shoot like Hawkeye, and sword fight like Deadpool. His brain records abilities the same way most people store memories. It's just basic copying. But this power comes with a cost people don't realize. His brain does not have unlimited space, so the more combat styles and techniques he absorbs, the more regular memories he has to erase to make room for them. Every new skill he copies forces out personal memories automatically. It's like overwriting a hard drive. New files replace old ones without warning. Because of this, Taskmaster forgets real people who were once important to him. He forgets relationships, places he's been, even emotional connections. Every time he learns something new, something in his past disappears. Over time, he became almost a ghost of his own life, unable to keep any personal relationships because they simply don't stay in his mind long enough. And this turns his ability into a tragedy. On the outside, he looks like a selfish mercenary copying everyone to get paid, but on the inside, he's losing himself piece by piece every time he improves. Marvel Comics and DC Comics exist in Earth 616, and Captain America used to be a comic book artist. In Earth 616, Marvel literally publishes comic books based on real superheroes who actually live in their world. Characters like Spider-Man, the X-Men, and others have seen Marvel comics about themselves on shelves. Sometimes these comics exaggerate things, sometimes they are accurate, and sometimes they are straight up propaganda, depending on who wrote them. But the important part is, in the Marvel universe, Marvel is not just a fictional meta joke, it's a real business business that prints comics based on the heroes that exist in that reality. Another surprising detail is that Captain America himself used to work as a comic book artist. Steve didn't always have money or direction, especially during times where he wasn't active as Captain America. So in different eras of Marvel canon, he actually got hired as a comic artist and illustrator. The funny twist is he has drawn Captain America comics from inside the same universe he is from. DC Comics is also real inside Marvel canon. The company exists the same way it exists for us as a publisher of superhero comics. Marvel characters have been shown reading DC Comics before and referencing fictional characters from their books. So inside Marvel's world, DC heroes like Batman and Superman are not real people, but fictional characters the same way they are in our world. And this creates a weird but fun layered reality. Wolverine went back in time with Spider-Man and taught early people how to brew alcohol. In one of Marvel's Stranger Time travel adventures, Wolverine and Spider-Man ended up getting thrown back into prehistoric times. While they were stuck there, they actually decided to make history a little more interesting. He taught early humans how to brew alcohol, basically introducing beer to ancient civilization way earlier than it should have existed. Logan did it casually, like it was just a normal skill to pass on. It wasn't done as a heroic culture contribution. It was more like his rough humor and why not attitude. To him, it was just something humans were going to invent eventually anyway, so he just helped them speed it up a bit. Spider-Man was obviously shocked because he realized how insane it was that Wolverine was literally altering human development in the past. This wasn't a small butterfly effect moment. This was a major historical influence made just because Wolverine felt like it. Mystique Holmes. Mystique has always been one of Marvel's most mysterious characters, constantly changing identities across different eras and cultures, but recently Marvel actually pushed one of those identities to a shocking new level. In the Sins of Sinister storyline, they revealed on panel that Mystique was operating in Old London during the Sherlock Holmes era, and she wasn't just hiding there, she was literally acting as Holmes himself. This wasn't just a wink or an implication anymore. Marvel actually showed it happening. For years, fans noticed something strange. Mystique's long-term lover is Irene Adler, the same exact name as Sherlock Holmes' most famous love interest in literature. People speculated that maybe Holmes existed in Marvel, or maybe Adler inspired Holmes. But instead, Marvel flipped the concept and made it so Mystique was the real source of the Sherlock Holmes legend. The detective stories basically came from her undercover life, not from a real British man. This fits Mystique perfectly because she has lived for well over a century and moves through history like a shape-shifting ghost. She was there when the world had no X-Men, no mutants revealed, no superheroes. She lived among humans under different faces and used her intelligence, intuition, and manipulation skills to influence society long before superheroes were a thing. So in Marvel canon, Dracula is real, Frankenstein's monster is real, the Martians from War of the Worlds are real, Cthulhu-style elder horrors are real, but Sherlock Holmes, he was never a real detective there, because the detective that history remembers was secretly Mystique the entire time. Spider-Man was initially hated by the publisher. When Stan Lee first pitched the idea to publisher Martin Goodman, the reaction was basically, "This is terrible." Goodman had a few big problems with it. People don't like spiders, teenagers aren't supposed to be main heroes, and a superhero dealing with money problems and real-life struggles, that just didn't fit the formula at the time. But Stan Lee really believed in the idea, so instead of giving up, he found a sneaky way to make it happen. He slipped Spider-Man's first story into the final issue of a comic that was already being cancelled, and that's Amazing Fantasy 15. Since the series was ending anyway, it was basically a why not move. No pressure, no expectations, just one last experiment before the book disappeared. And then something unexpected happened. The issue blew up. It became one of the best-selling comics Marvel had seen in years. Readers loved Spider-Man. Turns out, the things that were supposed to make him a bad idea were exactly what made him relatable. People didn't just want perfect heroes, they wanted someone who felt like them. And after seeing the numbers, Goodman quickly changes his mind, and Spider-Man got his own series soon after. And from there, the rest is history. George R.R. Martin was published in Marvel Comics. Long before George R.R. Martin was known for A Song of Ice and Fire, he was just a passionate comic book fan, and a pretty vocal one too. Back in the 1960s, as a teenager, he used to write letters to Marvel Comics talking about how much he loved their stories, and this wasn't just fan mail that disappeared into a void. Marvel actually published one of his letters in the pages of their comics. The letter appeared in Fantastic Four issue 17, addressed to legends like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and you can already see the future writer in him, because he didn't just say this was cool, he went all in. He called the issue stupendous and used some other big words and went into detail about what made it great. What stood out to him the most was the flaws in the heroes, like characters making mistakes or even something as simple as falling down a manhole. That detail is actually kind of crazy when you think about it, because years later, Martin would become famous for writing deeply flawed, complex characters in his own stories. So even as a kid, you can see what he was drawn to. Heroes who felt human, who messed up, weren't perfect. That's very Marvel, especially during that era, and it clearly left an impression on him. So before he was out here shocking the world with brutal plot twists, George R.R. Martin was just a fan writing letters about comics and getting published for it. It's a small moment, but it's kind of cool seeing where that passion started and how early influences like Marvel helped shape one of the most famous writers in modern fiction. Wolverine was supposed to be a mutated Wolverine, not a mutated human. When Wolverine was first created in the early 1970s, Marvel actually considered a very different origin for him. Before they settled on James being a mutant human, there was an early concept where Wolverine was literally going to be an actual Wolverine animal who had been mutated and evolved into a humanoid form by the High Evolutionary. This wasn't a rumor. This was a genuine idea inside the creative discussions before his origin was finalized. The direction would have made Wolverine more like a monstrous creature instead of a man with a traumatic past. He wouldn't have had a family, childhood, or emotional arcs tied to human history. He would have been closer to an animal that was artificially uplifted into something smarter and deadlier. That would have drastically changed his entire character, including his personality, relationships, and future stories. John Byrne openly talked about this concept years later, saying that he strongly pushed against it because he felt it was a bad idea. He didn't want Wolverine to be just a mutated beast. He believed the character needed a human identity with memories, pain, and depth for him to grow into a real icon. And that rejection led Marvel toward the version we know now, a broken, traumatized Canadian man transformed into a Weapon X experiment, not a mutated animal. Mystique is just as old as Wolverine. Mystique isn't just dangerous because she can change her shape. She's also extremely old. Marvel has shown that she has lived since at least the 19th century, long before the modern era of superheroes. Her shapeshifting doesn't just let her copy faces, it also prevents her body from aging normally, which lets her blend into every generation without ever being noticed as someone who's centuries old. She has lived through entire eras of history, switching identities as she needed. Wolverine is also from that same time period, being born in the late 1800s, before surviving through wars, trauma, Weapon X, and decades of hidden history. Because of this, Mystique and Wolverine are actually part of the same age tier in Marvel. Extremely old mutants who lived through the rise of modern civilization and watched the world transform over more than a century. They don't just know history, they lived in it. This explains why their stories cross paths so naturally and why they both have deep connections to the hidden corners of Marvel history. They weren't born in the age of heroes. They arrived in it after surviving lifetimes before it even began. Mystique isn't visually old because her power hides it, but she has existed for a very long time. So when people talk about extremely old mutants in Marvel, Wolverine isn't alone. Mystique is from that same forgotten age, making her just as ancient, experienced, and historically embedded in the Marvel universe as Logan himself. The X-Men were originally a failed experiment. It's hard to imagine now, but the X-Men, one of Marvel's biggest franchises, actually started as a flop. When they first debuted in 1963, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the idea was interesting, but didn't really click with readers. The concept of mutants, basically people born with powers, was a bit confusing at the time, and the book struggled to stand out compared to other Marvel titles. Sales kept dropping, and eventually the series was cancelled in 1970, replaced with reprints of older stories just to keep the name alive. For a while, it looked like the X-Men were just going to fade away. They weren't the cultural icons we know today, they were basically a failed experiment. But everything changed in 1975 with Giant Size X-Men 1. This issue rebooted the team completely, introducing a new, more diverse lineup, including characters like Wolverine, Storm, and Nightcrawler. And instead of a small group of similar characters, Marvel leaned into an international team with different backgrounds, personalities, and perspectives. Then came the real turning point, and that's writer Chris Claremont. He took the X-Men and transformed them into something much deeper. The stories became more emotional, more character-driven, and heavily focused on the idea of mutants being feared and discriminated against. That mutant metaphor turned the series into something way more meaningful than just another superhero book. And once it clicked, it really clicked. The X-Men went from being cancelled to becoming one of the best-selling comic series in the world for years. They dominated comics, inspired movies, cartoons, and spin-offs, and became one of Marvel's defining franchises. Santa Claus is the most powerful mutant ever, detected by Cerebro. As you know, Santa Claus actually exists inside Marvel Comics, and he isn't just a myth or a holiday joke. He is officially classified as a mutant. In one Marvel Holiday special issue, Cerebro scanned the world and detected Santa as the single most powerful mutant ever recorded on Earth. That means, at least in that specific canon moment, Santa ranked above Omega mutants like Jean Grey, Magneto, and Franklin Richards. It sounds like parody, but Marvel printed it as a real, in-universe fact. Marvel also used Santa in some strange and unexpected historical stories. One comic revealed that during World War II, Santa was kidnapped by Hitler. The idea wasn't played for complete comedy either, it was part of Marvel's older tradition of mixing real-world history with bizarre comic book twists. Later, Marvel took the weirdness even further by having Santa actually help save New York City from a clone of Adolf Hitler. Instead of delivering presents and cheer, Santa had to step in and stop something horrifying and dangerous from happening. It's one of those stories that sounds like random fanfiction, but it's printed Marvel canon that appeared in official holiday specials. So while most comic book readers think Santa in Marvel is just a silly seasonal cameo, the reality is that Marvel turned him into a cosmic level mutant who has been involved in insane plotlines. From being the strongest mutant Cerebro ever detected, to being kidnapped by Hitler, to saving New York from a Hitler clone, Santa Claus might be one of the strangest but most shockingly powerful characters Marvel ever included in their universe. Marvel nearly sold the rights to all its characters to Sony. Back in the late 90s, the company was coming out of bankruptcy and desperately needed money, so it started selling off film rights to its characters just to survive. That's how Spider-Man ended up with Sony Pictures in 1998 for around $7 million. At the time, that deal alone felt like a win for Marvel, but what came next is where things get crazy, because Spider-Man wasn't the only thing on the table. Marvel actually offered Sony the rights to almost all of its major characters, names like Iron Man, Thor, Black Panther, and more, for a total package deal of about $25 million. Yeah, basically the entire future of the MCU was available for the price of what today would barely cover a single movie's budget. The offer reportedly came from Marvel executive Ike Perlmutter, who was just trying to keep the company afloat at the time. But Sony passed. When the idea was taken to higher-ups, the response was basically, nobody cares about those other characters, just get Spider-Man. At the time, that mindset made sense. Spider-Man was the only globally recognized Marvel hero, while the others weren't seen as valuable enough to justify the extra money. So Sony stuck with Spidey and left everything else on the table. Looking back now, that decision is insane, because those nobody cares characters went on to build the MCU, one of the biggest franchises in history, generating billions upon billions of dollars. Marvel Studios turned Iron Man, Thor, and the rest into global icons. So yeah, Sony technically had the chance to own all of it and walked away. It's easily one of the biggest missed opportunities in Hollywood history. Marvel and DC both own the rights to the same character. For decades, Marvel Comics and DC Comics have been rivals, but every now and then, they actually come together and do something wild. One of the coolest examples of that is when they collaborated to create the Amalgam Universe, a crossover where both worlds merged into one. Heroes and villains were combined into brand new characters. It was chaotic, creative, and honestly, one of the most unique experiments in comic history. To make this crossover work without completely breaking both universes, they introduced a very specific character, Access. And here's where things get interesting. Access isn't owned by just one company. Both Marvel and DC share the rights to him. That's extremely rare, especially considering how protective both companies are of their characters. Access was designed specifically to act as a bridge between the two universes, making sure everything stayed somewhat stable even when reality itself was collapsing. In this story, Access is responsible for keeping the Marvel and DC universes separate after they were split again. These two realities are represented by powerful cosmic beings, often referred to as the Brothers. And if Access fails in his role, the universes would merge again into the Amalgam Universe. Basically, he's the only thing standing between two entire fictional realities crashing into each other again. Access isn't just a character inside the story. He represents the balance between two real-world companies that usually compete with each other. The fact that both Marvel and DC co-own him shows just how special that crossover era was. Marvel paid Stan Lee $1 million per year for being Stan Lee. For most people, Stan Lee is Marvel. Even long after he stopped working there full-time, he remained the face of the company. The guy doing interviews, showing up at conventions, and popping up in movies. So even though he hadn't been an active employee for years, Marvel Comics still had a huge reason to keep him around. His name alone carried the brand. Because of that, Marvel had a deal where they paid Stan Lee about $1 million per year for life. And the wild part, it wasn't for writing comics or running the company. it was basically for being Stan Lee. His presence, his personality, his connection to the fans, that was worth more than any traditional role. Every time he showed up somewhere, did an interview, or made a cameo, it boosted Marvel's image in a way no ad campaign really could. And honestly, from a business perspective, it made perfect sense. Stan Lee was a walking symbol of Marvel's legacy. He co-created characters like Spider-Man, the X-Men, and the Fantastic Four, and helped shape the entire modern superhero industry. Keeping him visible meant keeping that legacy alive in the public eye, especially as Marvel started growing into a global entertainment giant. So in a way, he was essentially getting paid $1 million a year just to exist publicly as Stan Lee. 616 Scarlet Spider, or Ben Reilly, holds the record for the highest amount of deaths. Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider, has died more times than almost any major Marvel character because of cloning, resurrection cycles, retcons, beyond storyline resets, and multiple return from the dead arcs. Ben's life became a loop of dying, coming back, dying again, and coming back again. Fans have counted well over 20 confirmed deaths, which is why people often say he holds the record. And what makes this even crazier is that Marvel actually acknowledged this inside the universe itself. Death, literally the embodiment of death, has commented on how absurdly often Ben dies. She treats it as a running cosmic joke, almost like even she is tired of seeing him show up again after being gone. Most characters in Marvel are lucky if they die once or twice. With Ben, it became part of his story identity, and his repeating cycle of death didn't just happen in one era either. It happened across Clone Saga, later Clone Experiments, modern storylines, alternate forms, and especially the recent Beyond era that turned him into Shazam. Each time writers tried to reinvent him, it usually came with another death or collapse that reset his status. Stan Lee sued Marvel. Even though Stan Lee is basically the face of Marvel Comics, their relationship hasn't always been perfect. In 2005, Stan Lee actually sued Marvel over money he believed he was owed from the massive success of superhero movies. According to his contract, he was supposed to receive a percentage of profits from projects based on characters he helped create, but the disagreement came down to how those profits were calculated. Marvel argued that profits should be counted after production and distribution costs, which would significantly reduce what Lee received. Stan Lee, on the other hand, argued that he should be paid based on the broader success of the films, considering how huge movies like Spider-Man were at the time. This wasn't a small dispute. It involved millions of dollars. In the end, the court ruled in Stan Lee's favor, confirming that he was indeed entitled to a share under the terms he argued. Despite how serious that sounds, things didn't turn into a long-term feud. Stan Lee and Marvel remained on good terms afterward, which is why you still saw him everywhere, especially in those iconic cameos across Marvel movies that fans always looked forward to. It never felt like there was bad blood publicly, even after the legal battle. Crazy to think that even legends like Stan Lee had to fight for what they were owed. I mean, business is business. Marvel argued in court that mutants were not people. Back in the early 2000s, Marvel Comics ended up in a surprisingly bizarre legal situation, and it all came down to taxes on toys. At the time, there was a US tariff that charged about 12% on imported dolls that represented humans, while toys representing non-human creatures were taxed at a lower rate. Marvel, through its toy company, Toy Biz, wanted to cut costs on its action figures, but the only way to do that was to argue something pretty wild in court. So what did they do? They basically claimed that characters like the X-Men weren't human. Yup, Marvel argued that its own characters, including mutants, should legally be classified as non-human creatures, rather than people. That way, their action figures would fall under the lower tax category, and somehow it worked. The court agreed, and Marvel ended up paying a reduced tariff, dropping from around 12% to about 6.8%. From a business standpoint, it was a smart move. But here's where it gets ironic. The X-Men have always been written as metaphors for civil rights struggles. People feared and discriminated against for being different, but still very much human. And yet, in real life, Marvel had to go to court and officially argue the opposite just to save money. So, on one hand, Marvel made a clever legal move that saved them a lot of money. On the other, it created this weird contradiction, where some of their most human characters were legally declared not human.